Welcome to the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. In 1948, retired Michigan Lumber Company owner William S. Crowe surprised to discover how little members of the Manistique community knew about the later 19th and early 20th century white pine logging era of the Upper Peninsula, began writing for local newspapers a series of essays recounting the history of that earlier period. The essays were published in book form in 1952. Later editions, which contained additional information and photographs, appeared in 1977 and 2002. William Scott Crowe was the oldest of 6 children born in Newcastle, Pennsylvania on September 23, 1875. From the first position as time boy and office assistant, Will Crowe was soon promoted to head bookkeeper. In 1912, Crowe and Lou Yalomstein bought out the business and holdings of the Chicago Lumbering Company. Ann McGlothlin Weller is one of the surviving granddaughters of author William S. Crowe. Together with Lynn McLaughlin Emmerich, they were instrumental in editing the 50th anniversary edition in 2002. This edition was re-released in 2024 as Lumberjack: Inside an Era in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, 70th Anniversary Edition.
Well, welcome everybody. Today we are here with Ann, A-N-N. I finally got it straight after many wrong emails. Sorry, Ann. She will be talking about Lumberjack: Inside an Era in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And she'll be on in just a moment. But first, we're going to turn it, like we always do, over to Victor. And he's going to be telling us some things about UPPAA, some upcoming UPPAA events. Take it away, Victor Volkman.
Well, spring is the most exciting time in the UP, and we're part of it. There's three exciting things coming up real soon. First, we'll talk about the launch of the UP Reader 9th edition. Volume 9 of the UP Reader, and that'll be coming out around April 15th. And we'll be featuring all the stories from the winners of the Dandelion Cottage Short Story Contest, which just wrapped up at the end of February. And that contest is where children in grades 5 through 12 all over the UP send in their stories to be entered in the contest. Cash prizes, and everyone gets a commemorative medallion and a copy of the UP Reader in which their story appears. So that is on the way. May 17th, the Upper Peninsula Publishers and Authors Association has the annual spring conference in Marquette. And if you become a member at UPPAA.org, go over, click on join or renew your membership, and you can attend the spring conference for absolutely free when you sign up as a member. We've got great speakers lined up. We have Michael Carrier, who is one of Michigan's most prolific thriller writers, and he'll be delivering the keynote address. And we have all kinds of other great breakout sessions. We're very honored to have Sharon Brunner talking about how you can write about Native Americans in your stories and represent them accurately and faithfully. And we have Tyler Tischler, who's on the call tonight. He'll be reprising his talk, Self-Publishing 101, which is always one of our most favorite presentations. But going on at the same time, we have the Young Writers Storytelling Workshop back for the second time ever. And it has a brand new format where we have breakout sessions for the kids, so they can choose topics that are personally of interest to them. For example, if they have an interest in journalism, they can take a breakout on journalism and get more depth on the subject. So registration for those will be opening soon. Probably April 17th, we'll open the registration for the Young Storytellers Writing Workshop. But you can get details for yourself there by going over to storytellingworkshop.org, and it's got the full schedule, and you can learn more about that. If you have a son, daughter, grandchild, niece, nephew who's into writing, definitely want to point them in that direction. All right, that's enough for me. Back to you, Evelyn.
I'm here with my mother, as always. I feel like we're Wayne and this is Garth. but because we're often together here. But anyways, what I would like to do before we start is I got to give Ann a real big thank you, because she sent me, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 new email addresses of friends and acquaintances of hers that she thought might be interested in tonight's talk. And I've added them into our mailing list. So if any of you are one of those lucky people, we're happy to have you tonight, and we'll keep you on the mailing list unless you write me and say you'd like to get off. And our hope is that you will, maybe stick with us. We've got the calendar there. We've got so many exciting book club meetings left to come. We always meet on the second Thursday of the month, 6 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock Eastern time. Next month, we are going to be speaking with Raymond Lusak, and he is, Victor, what can you tell us about him? Because he's pretty great.
Raymond is fabulous. He's a deaf poet who's grew up in the Houghton area and other parts of the UP, and he's currently living in the Minneapolis area. And he is a very prolific writer. You may have seen his book Chlorophyll, and his anthology Upper Poetry that came out last year. And we'll be on with a special ASL sign language translator, so we'll be able to talk back and forth. And I'm pretty sure he'll probably have some video presentations for us.
We met with him once before, and he's just fabulous. It's really great speaking with him and his interpreter, and I think you'll all enjoy it. He's also famous. Not just for writing, but for television. I think he was on a Law and Order episode one time. So he's pretty cool. And he's a 2-time UP notable author. So this will be our second time having him back. And the book we're going to be talking about is called Animals Out There Wild by Raymond Lusak. And we're just thrilled he's coming. So without any further ado, a big welcome to Ann, all her friends and family, and everybody else who's part of the UP Notable Book Club. And Ann is the granddaughter of the author, William S. Crowe, who wrote Lumberjack a ways back. And we are thrilled that she's here tonight to talk to us about it. So it's so cool because this is a UP Notable classic. And to have a family member speak about the book is just, it's a joy. We never know, do we, Victor? When we get these books, if we're going to get people who will talk to us or not, and how we're going to do it. And we did it. So thank you, Ann. And take it away.
Okay. Well, William Scott Crowe was my grandfather. His parents died when he was about 15 or 16. They were in Colorado, and there were 6 children, and he brought some of them back to Pennsylvania where they were adopted. Some stayed in Colorado. He came back to Pennsylvania, went to a business school, and then got a letter or some kind of communication from a lumber company in Manistique, where he'd never been. He said he'd never seen a big tree before. I'm not sure that's true, but anyway, he ended up in Manistique as what they called a time boy for this lumber company, and eventually ended up owning the company, and had property, part of which became Indian Lake State Park, a bank, and different other things. Well, he started writing newspaper articles about life in Manistique and lumbering. And some friends said, these are great, why don't you make them why don't you publish a book? And he said, no, nobody'd be interested in that. And so a friend eventually paid for 100 copies. And this is what that book looked like. This one's a little worse for wear. I had no pictures, basically just sort of a typewritten copy. And that was in 1952. So the 100 copies sold out pretty quickly. And he started again collecting photographs and doing some research and planning some trips to find more information. Well, he was born in 1875. And as he went through his 80s, he became less able to do some of these things. And he became ill in September of 65, I think, and died 6 weeks later. and made my mother promise that she would do another edition. And so she thought, I don't say no to Dad, and so she said she would. Well, it took her 12 years to gather some more information and some photographs and so on. And she had that one printed by the local newspaper. So that was 1977, and that was this edition. You might recognize the cover, but it was still, you know, not so attractive inside. But there were pictures and a lot of information, especially names of people around Manistique. Now for the next one, the 50th anniversary of the first Lumberjack was coming up. And my sister's husband, Lon, who's also been a UP author, said to her and to me, well, you girls should do a 50th anniversary edition. And not really having a clue about how much work it would take, we said, oh, okay. And so first, are you going to be playing that video, Victor, at some point?
Yeah, we can do it now if you'd like.
Okay. The narrator, one of the narrators on this 9-minute video is my sister. Lumberjack would not have been possible to continue publishing without her. And she passed away toward the end of February. We were going to do this program together. So I want to honor her with this tribute to her. She was amazing. And Victor has a 9-minute video that gives some context to the lumber industry. And she is the female narrator on that video.
All right, I'm gonna roll the tape, and if anyone has any trouble hearing, you can watch it tomorrow when we put out the YouTube video, or you can go to lumberjackbook.com and watch it on your own. But I'm gonna roll the video, and hopefully it will all work the way it's supposed to.
And the trees fell, and the trees fell, one by one, 20 in a day. Nothing could stand in my box.
From the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, much of life in Michigan centered around big woods, lumberjacks, sawmills, and lake shipping. As time boy, head bookkeeper, and later owner of the Chicago Lumber Company, my grandfather, Will Crowe, was a first-hand observer.
When I landed at Manistique from the Goodrich Line steamer on May 29, 1893, I was only 17 and had lived for 2 years on a cattle ranch on the treeless plains of eastern Colorado. I had never seen a lumbering camp, a sawmill, or even a big tree.
He walked out to Indian Lake through groves of white pines so tall they blotted out the sun and there was no undergrowth. He looked out across the lake and saw it filled from bank to bank with white pine logs rafted up for the run down the Indian River to the sawmills.
I believe there were no more colorful or interesting segments of American life than the lumber industries, nor a more picturesque individual than the old-time lumberjack and river driver.
Logging and river drive camps were identified by number and also by name of the foreman. The Chicago and Western lumber companies typically ran 9 camps per season. One who worked in the lumber camps remembered the first thing they always asked was, "Who's the cook?" Cookhouse rules were strict and strictly enforced. The men and women worked 6 long days a week. These Swedish and German loggers at a camp on the Ogontz River in Delta County made music on their Sunday day off. Every camp made its own World's Fair log load. The World's Fair log load was a load of giant white pines made up near Ewan in Ontonagon County and exhibited at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, where the loggers unloaded and reloaded it every day for the entertainment of visitors. Crowe has a tale of a visit to one of these logging camps.
Frank Cookson and I went up to Shingleton on the Haywire Railroad to inspect a large cedar contract. We walked on snowshoes 7 miles, arriving at number 1 camp about dark. The deep snow clung in the most unbelievable shapes, and everywhere the gigantic toadstools and enormous snowcaps on the stumps.
Expert 3-man crews cut the trees down, limbed them, and sawed them into logs of 16 feet where possible. Men and horses would skid the logs out of the woods to the logging roads created overnight by large ice sleds. Immense loads of logs would be piled on sleighs and hauled by horse or oxen teams to the riverbank to be driven down in the spring. Oxen were first used for hauling loaded sleds out of the woods and on the iced logging roads. Horse teams gradually replaced the oxen, and later mechanical means were developed to bring out the logs. Spring river driving was tough. When the logs piled up in a huge mass, the river hogs, as they were called, would go out with their peavies to release the key log. When this log was freed, the water and the logs roared down the stream, and it was a wild scramble to safety for the river driver. To prepare meals for the crews, the drives were usually followed in a wanigan, a large raft with a tar paper shack that had a stovepipe sticking out of the roof. Driving logs up to 6 feet in diameter down a small stream relied on earthen and log dams built by men and horse teams. Water from the dams upstream would be released before the logs were put into the river.
Cribs in the river were made of very large logs, bolted together at the corners and filled with heavy rocks. They extended above the water to back up the booms. A boom was a string of long logs chained together end to end. Controlled the logs coming down the river so that the drivers could read the log marks and send the logs into the proper channel for each mill.
Many different log marks, some quite fanciful, were used throughout Michigan. The big sawmills of the White Pine era in Michigan were almost all located on deep water on the Great Lakes, usually at the mouth of a stream. Mills were located at the mouth of almost every navigable river. The Menominee River had 43 mills at one time. Logs along Lake Superior not milled locally were gathered into huge booms and rafted to Pequaming and Hancock from as far away as Grand Marais, a float of 150 miles along the south shore of Lake Superior.
Sawmills of the time used either double-band steam saws or gang saws. A band saw is a steel belt with teeth on one edge. The logs were fed to it by a carriage shuttling back and forth at 2 miles a minute. It cuts only one board at a time, but very fast. A gang saw is a rack of large saws that cuts only on the downstroke, the saws being spaced to cut lumber of the thickness desired. The gang saws cuts the entire log, or cant, in one operation, but turns a lot of timber into sawdust.
The white pine lumber was piled on the docks and then onto sailing ships for transport to many lake ports. From the summer of 1863, when the first lumber schooner dropped anchor off the mouth of the river, the waterfront was a scene of great activity. For about 30 years, all freight and passenger traffic in and out was by water.
I once counted 29 lake boats alongside 18 lumber schooners tied up in the harbor in the slips. One evening I saw 3 schooners put out in a race for the Chicago market, and the setting sun on their sails was a beautiful sight.
Lumber schooners like the Quick Step of Michigan City, Indiana, sailing out of Ontonagon Harbor in 1912, were called lumber hookers and were designed for shallow water operations. They carried rocks or iron when empty to provide ballast.
In the spring, the Indians sailed a fleet of their Mackinaw boats over from Beaver Islands. These 2-masted open boats were very seaworthy, and the Indians were excellent sailors.
The time of the lumberjack in the woods and the whitewater man on the rivers lasted almost 100 years. Beginning with the coast of Maine, it moved across the country to the rugged western coast. Look for the giant white pine stumps left from the lumbering and wildfires. and look for remaining large white pine trees and groves, links to the years when the woods and rivers echoed to the shouts of the river drivers and the sound of the saws.
Fell one by one, 15 a day. Nothing could stand in my box saw's way, and the trees fell. Their souls went to heaven, but my soul still too early to tell. Maybe heaven, maybe hell, but it's much too early to tell.
Okay, and that was amazing. I love that. All right, Evelyn, you're muted.
Okay. So, Anne, is there anything else? I mean, would you like to tell us some more things about the book, or do you want to open it up to like questions and answers, or?
Well,
How would you-
I'll tell you a little bit more about the book, and then I'd be glad
Wonderful.
to take questions.
Wonderful.
The 50th anniversary book was a winner of a Midwest Book Achievement Award from the Midwest Independent Publishers, and that was an honor. In the back of the book, there's an acknowledgement of all the work that went into that book, this book. We did a new glossary. We did a biography of Mr. Crowe. We interviewed dozens of people. Mostly Lynn did them because a lot of them lived in the Upper Peninsula. And one of our interesting things was to go to the state archives in Lansing to look for more pictures. And we learned how they operate. They sat us at separate tables. They gave us white gloves to look through pictures, and they kept an eye on us. So, but we did find some good pictures, and most of those are in this book. But one interesting thing was that we'd run across a reference to cows walking in the streets of Manistique, and it mentioned Harper's Weekly, which was an old, very prominent publication at that time. And we made a note of that. So I'm going to read that one to you because it seems kind of timely of these days. The Harper's Weekly article referenced by Mr. Crowe poked fun at the wandering cows of Manistique, which, though fairly well tolerated by the populace in the past, had taken to pilfering quantities of vegetables from local markets, resulting in passage of the Cow Ordinance by the city fathers. An excerpt. It was decided that cows must keep off the streets at all hours, and it is now possible to buy fresh vegetables in Manistique. And ambitious young heifers no longer put their heads in the general delivery of the post office, to the consternation of the young lady in charge. The cows of Manistique abused their privileges and lost them. Many very able politicians may learn a valuable lesson from this simple experience of the Manistique cows. That was from 1896. When someone close to you passes away, you often look for signs from the person. And one of Lynn's daughters has found some feathers, and her mom had said, "I will send you feathers." Well, I was looking for some more information. I particularly wanted to find out how many copies of that edition of Lumberjack we sold. I couldn't find it anywhere. Then I picked up this book again, and I had looked through it before, but I riffled through it again, and I came across a card in Lynn's handwriting, and it said, 7,104 copies, 10 years. It was a good run. So it went out of print per se in 2012, and we were delighted that Victor has picked it up and issued a 70th edition, and we hope it has an even longer life, because from beginning to end, it's been like 73 years so far. So I'll be glad to try to answer questions. I don't know tons about lumbering, and as I say, it's been 12 years since we published, so, but I'll do my
Alright.
best.
I'm gonna change the view of my computer so I can see if people have their hands raised. But does anyone have any questions for Ann tonight, or comments, or things they'd like to talk about? Okay, Karen, why don't you go first? Okay, Karen's gonna unmute here. It's usually in the left-hand corner.
Okay. All right. When I was reading this book, I was totally fascinated by the fact that it's like 130 years ago, but then the book was written about 70 or so years ago. And I looked at it as two pieces of history, the history of what he was telling, but also the history of the time that he wrote it was in
Right.
there. And that just, I've never read something quite like that. You know, it's either something that's been written recently about something long ago, but having the two long agos, you know, when he would talk about how much money something was and then what that would be in today's dollars, that I'm like, well, what would it be now? You know?
Yeah, yeah. He was very meticulous. We have ledger books that he kept. I spent 5 cents for this. I spent $1.50 for rent. We've given those to the Schoolcraft County Historical Society, along with some photos and other things. So, yeah, he had beautiful handwriting. He was a self-taught person. He had very little formal education, but he had an extensive library, all very well organized, and he played chess by mail to people across the country. So he was a fascinating person. And to his granddaughters and grandsons, he would send letters on birch bark that he had taken from downed trees, and take us on hikes around Indian Lake where we had cottages. And so he was a great person as a grandfather.
He sounds like it, yes.
Yeah.
Mary had her hand up. Go ahead, Mary.
There's a hand over there.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really interesting video, and sounds like a great book to look at. What it reminded me of is a few years back, I saw pictures from the 1930s, probably WPA, of retired loggers, and that they had these had at least one retirement camp where they lived in dorms and all of that, and it was just fascinating just to see the pictures. But then there were also pictures of men who lived alone, and they just owned tons of stuff. You looked in there, there was hardly any place for a person to walk, and so I'm just wanted to find out if you ever heard anything about what happened to retired loggers. The 1930s, I'm assuming they would have been somewhere in their 60s or 70s at that time.
Well, they worked very hard. I don't know how many of them lived into their 60s and 70s, for one thing. So whether there was some kind of formal organization, I just don't know. There were logging centers around Michigan, around Muskegon, for example, and other places in the UP. And I believe there's logging information at the Hackley Hume Center in Muskegon. Yeah.
Thank you. Good question there. And from H, I don't know your whole name, but I do see the letter H. All right, and now I see Mary Frances is ready. She's got a question. Go ahead, Mary.
Okay. Well, my husband worked for the Forest Service in Tawa City and Oscoda for about 17 years. And I'm sure there's lots of great museums and, all around, but they happen to have a bronze monument there on the Huron National Forest that shows, the riverman and the surveyor and the logger. with the correct tools. I remember there's a spot where he mentions a painting that showed the wrong kind of axe, but this guy has the right one. And they have a lot of really neat displays. There's a place where you can try out using a PV, and yeah, it's on well, actually, it's on a place called Monument Road, which I happen to live on. So it was 10 miles from my house, and it's down below the bridge. But yeah, that area had been completely logged over and then was replanted in red pine by the CCC. And while my husband was there, they were beginning to harvest, selectively some of the red pine. And it was also a lot of jack pine grew there, and that was a lot scrubbier. But a little ways up, maybe 50 miles north of us, was Hartwick Pines, which is a place where you can see some of those big old white pines. And that was a place we made sure to take our kids. So
that's a fascinating place. We had one of the designers we hired. Let's see if I can find this. She did drawings of white pine branches, and so that was the motif throughout the book. It was
I noticed
white pines were beautiful pines.
Yeah, they really are, and there's so much. They're so soft with the 5 needles and the really a lovely tree. Yeah, we also that monument is on the banks of the Osabo River, which was one of the rivers that they ran him down to the town of Oscoda, which was on Lake Michigan. And all along the river, there's these big sand hills, which they call the high banks. And that's where they pile the logs. And then as they rolled down those hills in the spring, of course, now those hills are still bare sand piles. But our kids loved running up and down them.
Well, that was another way to transport logs, wasn't it? Just roll
them down into the river and get them down to Lake Michigan. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Actually, that's what I just finished a book that is partly about the logging industry in the UP, because it's about my Irish ancestors and how they managed to get from Ireland across Canada following logging camps and ended up in the UP. And so it was, for me, since I'd lived in Michigan for 19 years, it just seemed like, I know I was a troll, but I still felt like I had a lot of affinity for the UP. Now I live in Northwest Montana, which is quite a bit like the UP, except the mountains are taller.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Crowe was quite defensive about the lumber people, because some of them had a kind of a rough and ready reputation, but he found them to be wonderful guys, maybe with a few evenings out that weren't so domestic, shall we say, but but on the whole, he thought they were good people, very good people.
One other thing I noticed is that he was very fortunate in that the company he worked for, they had such good relations with the management, because last year, after reading Death's Door, during that same time period, the situation in the Keweenaw with the copper mining owners was a lot different.
Yeah. Well, he eventually became one of the owners, and I don't know a whole lot about that. But starting out as a lowest probably level employee.
That was the good way to go, because he knew the whole system. Whereas a lot of the copper mines sent in a manager from back east, and nothing else to say about that.
That was one thing I enjoyed in the book, is it really talked about, I think, a little bit different than these mining companies, like Mary's saying. It would be like one family with a lot of boys, and they would run that lumber company. So it was kind of, you know, a difference, you know.
Yeah.
Now, Mary, since you wrote a new book and it is a little bit about lumber camps, do you have a cover of it? Can you show it to us?
Yeah,
Okay,
this
an
is
Irish Odyssey.
yeah,
Okay.
Despair to Hope. The photo that's on the cover was taken by my husband 2.5 years ago. We were on a tour of Ireland, and it's the coast of County Kerry, which is where my ancestors came from.
Great.
And
And we
they
could
had-
buy it from Amazon?
It's going to be available April 11th.
Good to know.
Yeah.
That's good for us to know. So thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that.
I'm going to have one earmarked to send to you for the library.
Perfect. Now, do we have any other questions or comments out there for Ann? All right, Sue Harrison, I see her hand up. Here we go. Thank you, Mary. Go ahead, Sue.
I just wanted to say that my father-in-law worked for a lumber company, lumbering in the eastern UP. And their logs, by that time, he was born in 1919. So by the time he was doing this was right after high school. And so he was in like 1939, 1940. And so the lumber era was kind of ending, but yet some of the woods in the Minnetonka area were still uncut. So he was working there. He was a truck driver. In those days, they had a small gauge railroad that loaded up with logs. And then I don't know how that got to where they had trucks, if they had horses too. I don't know. I think they had horses too, because he talked about working with horses, but he drove the truck down to Raver Bay. And that's where they loaded the logs or floated the logs. And he only spoke well of everything. And he was very, very proud that he was the person who could get that truck overloaded with logs up this hill that they had to get through this area to get to where they needed to load the logs. And when you're talking about how long the lumbermen lived, that's what Ann had said, she wasn't sure. My father-in-law lived to be 99. So I think those early days of working as a lumberjack and as a truck driver for the lumber companies did him a lot of good. He must have been pretty tough.
Yeah, Mr. Crowe was 90, I think, but I was thinking specifically of the guys on the river.
Yes.
You know, there wasn't ready healthcare or someone
And
to
the
bandage you
engines.
up or
Oh.
rescue you if you drowned
Yeah.
or fell into the river. Yeah. There was a question from Tyler.
Okay.
And he said his audio wasn't working, but he asked if Mr. Crowe had stories about Paul Bunyan. I'm sure he did, but I don't remember him ever telling us stories about Paul Bunyan. He used to make up stories about animals and so on and tell us kids when we were little. Manistique has a huge statue of Paul Bunyan in the front of what used to be a school. I don't know if it still is or not, but yeah, and Babe the Blue Ox. But I never heard Paul Bunyan stories from him, Tyler.
Ann, I've got a question. I've seen, they're the lumber barons who got quite wealthy and they built these huge mansions. And then later, when they passed away, the community got the mansion, they turned into a library or a museum or something. And I was just wondering at what scale, do you know what scale Mr. Crowe worked at in terms of the volume of lumber compared to, say, the huge lumber barons? Was it like a smaller mill or
I don't know how C&L Lumber Company compared in size to other companies, but to my knowledge, there were no lumber people mansions in Manistique. I don't remember any mansions in Manistique.
Well, just curious, because
Yeah, I know there were some, yeah.
there must have been other men like Mr. Crowe who started from scratch and worked their way up to owning lumber companies around the UP.
And he owned a bank too, and he had a nice house. It was directly across from the courthouse. The Presbyterian church was on one side of the square. The Baptist church was on the other side of the square, and Mr. Crowe's house was on the third side. So he was centrally located.
There were some big mansions in Bay City, Michigan, where the big companies floated logs down the Saginaw River.
Yeah, a lot of his book also talks about community activities, like he was part of a bicycle racing group, and there were community church potlucks, and one 4th of July, an airplane landed, which was to everyone's amazement. So a lot of that is surrounding the lumbering with what people were doing in town and in their daily lives.
Anne, I have a question. You mentioned that you did dozens and dozens of interviews, and could you tell us about some of those?
Well, as I said, most of those were done by my sister with people who were in the Upper Peninsula. And so she has some references to those in the back of the book, but let's see if I can find some. Oh, let's see.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, good. While Anne's looking that up, I was just gonna say, she was talking a moment ago, just to give her some time so she can look up there, about different community activities. And I actually learned a word from this book. I had never heard of the word Chautauqua. So I had to look that word up. So I appreciate that, Anne. So I always like when I learn something from a book. If I remember right, a Chautauqua was kind of like something in the 1800s and 1900s where people, kind of like an education class for people, like an education opportunity. So I always like to learn. So thank you, Anne. And did you find the passage you wanted to talk about?
It extended longer than that because around a part of the Lower Peninsula, there was a set of cottages, most of whom were owned through Methodists, and they had Chautauqua, which was exactly as you say, and it's relatively common in like the East, New York, Pennsylvania, and I think it still exists, but it's an interesting word.
Yeah, a new one for me.
Well, let's see. Well, here's one from, that was a letter that he got from a person from Newberry. And it says, I see you have read the book Call It North Country and apparently considered it highly colored. I share your views. You note that in the chapter about Seney, it makes passing reference to a man named Carlson who ran a boarding house. That man was my grandfather. So those kinds of personal kinds of connections were what he got from letters to people or interviewing people. Harvey Saunders was a prominent lumber person around that area. And he said, I read in the Pioneer Tribune that Lumberjack is going to be printed soon. I think it will be good, as I talked into a dictaphone for him for 6 hours. So those were the kinds of things, Alice.
Thank you.
But I will lend you my book if you want to look for more.
Good.
And this is Victor's version. This is the 70th anniversary. Being published by the Loving Healing Press. So we're really happy that it's continuing without us having to do anything.
It was a bit of a trick to resurrect it because there really weren't any digital files left over from the the 50th, which would have been 2002, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we had a very high precision scanning done, and it's basically reconstructed like from a Xerox machine. Plus, we had some wizardry from our cover designer, Doug West, who made the new cover look like the old cover, but with extra stuff on it.
Great.
Well, my sister, I said I wanted to especially honor her because in addition to interviews, she was the bill payer and the keeper of the records and the treasurer in a sense. She and her husband had started North Country Press. And Lumberjack, the 50th edition, was published by North Country Press.
One thing I really liked about the book, I don't know why I never thought of it, but I thought it was interesting how these logging camps would have hired a camp hunter that would be somebody who would do the hunting for the meat for the camp. I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't realize, I should have figured that happened, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So it was kind of neat.
Well, they might have got a deer or something. I sort of assumed that a lot of, potatoes and salt and all those kinds of things came from Manistique or somewhere, Newberry possibly.
Yeah.
But it was very important to have a good cook.
Yeah. And that whistle too, that there was a picture of earlier, that camp horn that blows people in to eat in a logging camp. They have one that you can use actually at the, what's the name of that museum in Marquette? Tyler probably knows. Is it the Marquette Regional History Museum? Yes. Okay. I went there for the first time this January with a friend visiting from overseas. And she picked up that horn and gave it a blow right away. I mean, and it's right there with the logging camp stuff. So if anyone wants to check one out, there's one there. So anybody else have any final comments or questions or anything else they would like to ask Ann while we have her here with us? Okay. Yeah. So very nice, Ann. I can't thank you enough for coming on tonight. It was a real treat to have you. And I have to ask a question that probably has nothing to do with the book, but I keep looking at that beautiful, is that a quilt behind you? What are we looking at there?
It's a fabric piece from when we were doing a work trip in Bolivia. We were helping build a basketball court and we were building it with bricks because cement cost more. So we built the bottom with bricks and then Bolivians came and put a coat of cement on the top for the basketball court. And one day we were laying bricks and all of this, and we were all of a similar age a number of years ago. And they came over and they said, well, this is good, but in our country, old Bolivians don't do this kind of work. So we got a kick out of that.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. I was kind of admiring it when you were speaking earlier. So
yeah, thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
I don't know if you can see this or not, but
okay.
This is sort of my one of my things that I think about when I'm writing. It says, find something you're passionate about and let your pen give it voice.
Oh, wow. That's a nice thing to share with this group of people. We've got a lot of writers on here tonight. I know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I remember doing one breakout session at the Upper Peninsula Publishers Conference a few years ago. That was fun.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much. I think it was a real treat to have you tonight. And like I say, for all the new people who came on tonight, I do hope you stick with us. We're a fun group and you learn a lot about the Upper Peninsula and a lot about our very unique and special history. So thank you very much. And we will see you all next month when we meet with Raymond and Adam, who's his interpreter, and when he talks to us about animals out there wild. So have a good evening.
There's some comments in the chat.
Some comments in the chat. I got to most of them already.
Okay.
Mary showed a picture of the cover of her book, and we have Tyler there. And then there should be one more. Oh, that was Victor saying he can't hear me. Oh, yes. Victor says there's a 21-minute version of the video at lumberjackbook.com. And Tyler mentions that the Tequamanon Logging Museum in Newberry has a great collection. Have you been there, Ann?
No, I have not.
Well, we should go.
I should. Yeah.
Tyler recommends it.
Okay.
All right. And then we've got just some thank yous. So I think that's it. Have a good evening, everyone. And I look forward to next month.
You've been watching the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. To join or for more information, please visit us at www.upa.org or www.upnotable.com.